Is there a doctor in the house?
Doctor, you have a visitor in the main lobby.
Hello and welcome to the Talk to the Doc podcast, where today we're talking about why I'll just handle it myself might be the most expensive sentence a CEO ever makes. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and the doctor is in. Our guest today is Kurt Uhlir, and let's go ahead and get into it. Hello, Kurt. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Hey, well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a chief marketing officer, usually on the B2B side or B2B companies on the B2C side. But I've been part of it at this point of almost 80 acquisitions and funding rounds and or exits, including like an $8 exit. But I've taken what I've done at some of those companies, and I tend to come back down much no more to companies now that are 10 million to 100 million that want to add a zero in the next couple of years to that. And so that's given me the title, the king of scaling companies. I'm really good at doing this regardless of the industry. And because I've been so successful, which is kind of rare as a CMO, but I think in terms of systems and whatnot, it's allowed me to be on thousands of stages around the world, helping coach other business leaders into, hey,
Excellent.
Let's rechange what you're thinking about, because usually companies, especially in that smaller stage, will hit a glass ceiling, need an inflection point, and usually there's just one or two that's holding them back from doing that.
Gotcha. Yeah, sounds like you're helping people reach.
I try to be. Several of the CEOs I've worked retire. One of those had been the former CFO of Disney as a whole, who is the president of Disney theme parks, and he joined our little company at 85 million a year in revenue, thinking it was a semi-retirement gig, and he definitely retired afterwards. Even after Disney, we put some good in his bank account. We've met quite a few times, which is great for both my CEOs and the other families around us.
Well, I'm excited. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So the way the doctor is first your pulse. So start off with what do you think's kind of the industry trend sticks out to you right now?
The biggest thing for me, especially on like the B2B side, is companies, if you go look at like the sales that have closed for them, despite what they actually usually will say or their owner will say, I'm looking from like what's the market of most of the deals for these companies that are feeling stuck or they're not growing the way they want to. The people that come in the door have been reached out to from a cold reach out, or it's just part of more of an RFP, as opposed to like what's the percentage of qualified sales conversations that are taking place where the buyer already knows about your company, your point of view, your category position before they start a conversation with you. And that's really important for a few things we may talk about.
Okay. Well, I'm curious about that. When a buyer, I guess, kind of already knows your point of view, the first call, I mean, how does that change the sales conversation?
It really matters unless like your audience be one of the top 2 or 3 brands in whatever their category is. And I say that they could be a local IT provider or they could be a CRM product. And I run marketing for a large CRM right now. What matters is, like, people usually lie to you. They don't mean to, but it's like they have all the best intentions by saying they're looking at other products. But at the end of the day, the person making the decision at your potential buyers, the data says, and I've experienced this myself, that 7 out of 10 times they are going to choose a risk reduction choice over somebody else. And what that means is if you're one of the top 2 or 3 players, in the case of CRMs, if you're Pipedrive or you're Zoho, that like those are big players in the SMB realm. You may have a better CRM, but 7 out of 10 times the buyers may go through your whole sales process and they will still choose somebody else because they don't want to be considered the person that makes the bad choice. And so what you don't know is you're wasting sales effort, marketing dollars on leads, where 7 out of 10 of the buyers that may even work through your process are never going to choose you because they don't want to be the person that brings back an egg. So if in the end, you can flip that so that you start doing things in marketing or sales so that when somebody reaches out to you, they're already aware of your company. They are aware that maybe you're the 8th largest provider, but you have a different strong position. Well, now you're starting to open up to that total available market that you didn't realize was closed off to you before, but really was.
Gotcha. So it's the old nobody got fired for hiring IBM mentality.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those that don't have quite as many miles on them as you and I do, but that's the decision. You think about it in terms of Salesforce, Salesforce or Pipedrive now. 50 person company is ever going to get fired because for saying we should use Salesforce's SMB product or bringing in Pipedrive because they're so accepted. But you may have a far superior product, and we actually do at SureSend.ai. But like you have to position yourself different. That risk isn't there.
Some of the elements of that positioning, what's the strategy to get there?
So first of all, it's usually taking strong positions. If you're going into anything, whether it's a low B side or something like CRMs, if you're trying to combat that market, you have a strong differing opinion about how, say, CRM should be approached versus any of the dominant players. So you should be loud about that. Doesn't mean you have to be belittling or negative about the others, but it's like we believe that most CRMs are bad because they were built for managers as opposed to built for the salesperson. Like that's a strong ethos that we have. Like at the end of the day, most sales-driven organizations, we'll just stay with CRM example, like 80 to 85% of sales reps fail out of just the company they're at, but their industry. If you look at like a 24-month period, that's not just bad for the companies that they're at, but it's really bad for the individuals that are trying to pay for their families and provide for their families. Because CRMs are built as like an accountability tool for a management side, as opposed to Mr. and Mrs. Salesperson, do these 3 things every day, win the week, and you will make money. Like if that happens, then the company makes money and churn goes down. That's a strong opinion that like we have at SureSend that is very different than most people have. You should have that for your industry against your competitors and start it from the beginning. You should also, as much as possible, like not be telling your story. I kind of give the example, like we all wanted to be Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman when we grew up, but nobody almost was like, I want to be Alfred or Robin and Batmobile. But that's what your marketing should be. Like I also know nobody's going to come buy my CRM and talk about how good our CRM product is. What my marketing says is here's 24 companies because they chose us. We're the Batman that polishes the Batmobile, or the Robin that polishes the Batmobile, and the customers, the decision makers are the superhero. At which point, your customers, if you're searching every day to make them immaculately successful, and your marketing tells the story of Amanda and Bob and Susie as the superheroes of their own stories, they are going to tell the story. They have no choice but to tell your story at that point.
Gotcha. So you're the wise Yoda that helps on his adventure and say galaxy.
Yeah, or like even on that, you look at things Star Wars. Like we'll say with Star Wars and like the Clone Wars was like a 7-season series. Like every once in a while, you saw this one came in. She was the librarian that knew where everything was when they needed to go do research. Like I don't even remember her name. I'm sure some Star Wars fan out there does. But it's like, but none of them would have survived and did if when they said we're looking for this one planet or this one thing that she knew where everything was. Well, that's the story. Like, that's the reason the superheroes are able to do their thing. And so, do I care that somebody knows my company's name? No, what I care about is they found my company because they asked you, hey, what's the CRM you're using? You said, SureSend. It's at SureSend.ai. Great. That's what brings people to me. And now I make my market, instead of just winning like 1 out of 10 deals, it might be possible able to win 7 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 deals at that point.
Well, Yoda, help us on the. Let's pretend I'm a small organization. I don't have a position established first. How do I figure out where to begin, or how do I figure out what my position is?
A little bit of staring out the window time, I would just say. And I say that in terms of like, AI can help you with this and tell it that you need it to help suck information out of you.
Ideation.
But you can't go to ChatGPT and say, why is my company different if you have not already established that? You have to say, look, I'm selling this product, this service. Here's my competitors. I need to establish why we are fundamentally different, and say I need you to critiquing different ideas for that. But for me, I'll sit out the window. I'll think through some of those like questions, and I will write them out in note cards for me, like 3x5 note cards until I just get a bunch of them. And I'm not like needing to fully think them out. You just write ideas, you put it aside till you think of something else, and then go through the last 10 customers you signed. And go, after they paid me money, and they were really happy paying me money for years, especially with recurring revenue, what did they say about me? And if you don't know, pick up the phone and ask them. And then do something that nobody does. Call your customers that churned, that left, and say, hey, I'm not trying to resell you. I'll send you your wife or your husband out to dinner. Can you just 15 minutes to tell me why you chose somebody else? And the only questions you can ask are curious questions. Well, you don't need to try to resell them. What you need to then after that is process and say, was what they told you reality? And if it wasn't, well, then that's flaws in your marketing that you need to address up front. You need to tell the story. Like, how could you have told the story so they would have onboarded differently? They would have trained, they would have used your product. How could you have solved that? I mean, people with wonderful products out there sell it in, and nobody ever uses their product, and then they churn out, and they never use their service, so they don't see the value of it. Okay, your product was great. You didn't make sure they were successful afterwards. So you didn't actually serve the person. You were great at selling them, but you didn't serve them. So once you hear that, now you start to go adjust that situation.
Gotcha. So you can kind of think it through, ideate yourself, help you, your current clients, reach out to people who've gone away and, flesh out that message. Now, once you get that message together for a smaller organization that may not have a large marketing budget, what are the practical ways to kind of help build the familiarity you're talking to once you get your mission?
A few things. So one is, especially when your customers say something positive about it, that's the time where you should have a standard operating procedure for you or every step in your company, so that when you hear people say, thank you for this, I can't believe you all do this, that's when you need to ask for a review. And so, and you need to give people like on your team, preferably not you as the owners doing this, they need to have copy paste wording or a template they can read off that's just like, say this and get the review. And to be able to both solicit those reviews, maybe especially for those of us that sell services or much larger like SaaS recurring revenue things, being like, that's awesome. We'd love to be able to tell your story, not tell our story. We want to tell your story with us as part of that. Could I schedule just a Zoom call to record for 15 or 20 minutes where I ask you some questions about that? All you need is the video. You can go to Fiverr or Legit, like there's a site called legit.com, it's a little bit different, but You can get video people on there very cheaply, or hiremymom.com is another one that'll stitch that video together and take ums and the ahs and make a nice short story that then you can upload to YouTube, you can send out to your other customers, you can print a site and you send to that customer so that they go and share the story. Just make sure it's telling them as a superhero, not you. It's sure. Really, at the end of the day, it's really easy to do with Riverside or Zoom or anything right now. We all have these things. You just have to hit record and then schedule it.
Gotcha. So a little bit of the story brand concept and, just getting it out there. Starters hot. So if an organization, and I mean, everyone goes through periods where sales maybe through cycles or whatever, but what are the warning signs that a company is maybe not losing out to competitors, but just because the market doesn't know who they are?
I think for me, I find at companies, I think especially the size, like with your audience and whatnot, percentage of deals that both move through a funnel, and especially those that move through a sales funnel, and having the founder involved in it. Now, that doesn't mean that they could not be behind the scenes coaching or giving some support or something, although hopefully that could happen without there. But it's usually people that have a company, I find that's 20 people, even 100 people. Well, the problem that I see when I get called in to either coach that CEO or perhaps step in for marketing for them is, like, when the CEO is there, they can close deals. Like, one of the things I can do rare as a CMO, sometimes a chief growth officer, is like, I'll take every sales call. I'll close like 80-90% of them. I'm really good at that parsing and closing. Sure. But if I can't replicate myself, then we do not actually have a sales process. We have a salesperson. And so, like, what percentage of those qualified opportunities are moving through a meaningful stage without having the CEO, the president, or somebody senior involved? Like, that's a super meaningful thing, because either and we can dig a little more into that. But with that, it shows that, like, if you have enough of a brand established, people wanting to ask more, and they know that you'll solve this, and they're kind of driving the process themselves or telling you what their decision-making process is and bringing in your people. On the other side, what's not helpful for your growth is to have either a charismatic founder or a just charismatic and great sales closer, and they're the person driving it forward. Because, like, I mean, I know people that can sell anything. I mean, I own this weird little, like, North Alabama that sold swords and martial arts equipment. And we had this one guy that, like, he literally would go sell like a replica, like $500 replica, like grandmother that didn't have anything like that randomly walked in the store or walked by one. He's like, I bet I can go sell her that replica katana. Like, no, you can't. But he could, and it was manipulative in a thing. But like, that was because he was such a good closer. You could find a way. That's not who you need. You need that to be able to move through based on either what your company does or without having like just a really good salesperson there.
Now, I've something recently about how people want to purchase without having a salesperson involved, like, just the post-COVID mentalities that, do their own research. And is that kind of what you're finding as well?
Not as much. I just say that I think what I've seen in my experience over the years and before COVID, maybe more so now, is people don't want to be sold to.
Sure.
They want to be served. I want to make sure I'm making a good decision. And so we've all been in those experiences where somebody, like the gentleman I said, that could sell a katana to anybody, like that is trying to sell in the product where it's not the best thing. Like the salespeople that I want and where your team will grow with would, you have to make sure you reward them too, but they will look at a potential customer that was ready to make a deal and say, I don't think we're the best solution for you. You should choose somebody else. And they may even name a competitor that you should go talk to if you're not already talking to them. When your sales team takes that approach and really trying to find the best for the potential customer, people actually want that because, like, no matter what it is, it's rare to this is the best decision for me. Usually we have a number of good offers and I'm looking at some level of risk, or maybe I can't fully make an objective decision because there's so many. So help guide me through how I should be thinking about this, where you're not always the end answer. People want that kind of service in some way.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense. So let's go ahead and move on a little bit. Let's talk about blood pressure. When I think of blood pressure, it's kind of that performance metric that kind of tells a story for you. What's the blood pressure right now?
Yeah, that would be. I mean, but ultimately it is a percentage of those qualified leads that will at least move through all the way to like a pure signing, but hopefully even sign without you involved. In a healthy company, marketing, sales, customer success, they should all know, not only should they know the message that they should be offering, they should know, like, when the ideal customer comes in the door, like, who are he or she, and not only like problems are we trying to solve, but like what would the budget item in their QuickBooks say, or where they're paying for this out of. And I say that of like the good sales leader that owns the company even necessarily consider that, or they may just know it innately. You need your entire team to kind of know that, because in unhealthy companies, what happens, you may start to have a sales team, you may even have a decent sized sales team, but deals will start to stall and then they'll go pull on a sales leader. Or it's like you're at the car dealership and they're like, let me go talk to the boss, and it starts to feel manipulative then about bringing them in. Like, no, like you need to enable them to not be able to have the message to walk through, but they need to have the authority themselves to be able to move things through and ask questions without having to come to you. And I say that because, like, if everybody's approach in the company is how do we serve the customer, well, you're not always the best option for it. And the executive is not always going to be available. And so how do you empower them to make the decisions, good or bad, where you're not involved?
So is your approach more about making sure they're trained, about having a playbook, or the coach or the CEO getting that information to a team? What's the driving?
Yeah, great question. I'm a firm believer in playbooks and having things written down. But I say that in terms of a playbook should be templated for the general play, but it shouldn't be a scripted. And so I just say that I guess one way that I try to think about it is, at the end of the day, can the team move revenue through without an executive rescue? And if they can't, and whenever you start to see it gets stuck, one of two things has to happen. Either you have to evaluate the playbook if it keeps happening, and then everybody helps contribute to how you overcome that, or if either you as executive doesn't have this problem or someone doesn't, then you take the approach where it says, great, I'm going to do this alongside of you for a few days, and you're going to watch me do it, and then I'm going to coach you as you do it, and then I'm going to watch you do it and do like a post-review eval for it, but you actually do it for them. Like, I've had friends at companies that 50 people that are great salespeople. They end up firing somebody because when we replay it, all they did was tell the person, they told her to try harder and you need to get your numbers right. That's not coaching them. That's different than, like, I tell my friend, I'm like, Craig, just tell her you're going to take 4 calls. You're not going to dock her pay for it. They're still her deals. And she's going to listen to how you approach it and ask you questions. Then the next 4 calls, she's going to take the calls with you on there, and you're the supporting cast, not the main player. But it's like not as that, but that's how you rewrite the play, how you coach the player. At the end of the day, it's not just what does the playbook say, it's how do you actually interpret this and actually do it when there's stress that's going on.
Sure. Now, how does a leader balance helpful coaching and basically training the team to
Coaching, just like kind of mentoring for me, it's a set amount of time, and so you need to tell them what that process is going to look like. Like I gave the example of like what might happen depends on the number of sales, but even like on sales thing, if we're selling $50,000 a year services, I'm still probably going to take the next. There's a real problem. I'm going to take your next 4 calls and I'm going to be the lead for them. They're still your deals, but I'm going to actually run that call and be the primary talker. And you may only be the note taker on there, kind of introduced in, where you can come back and ask. I'm going to tell you that ahead of time. And I'm going to say ahead of time, my intention is to do 3 to 4 calls. And then you're going to do 3 to 4 calls where I try not to talk. I'm just there. And I will not identify myself as a sailor or the owner at that point. And then you're going to take 4 more calls. And they're going to be recorded, and we're going to go back and we're going to watch them 3 times. We're going to watch, like especially Zoom, we're going to watch them with the audio off. We're going to listen to them with the video off, and then we're going to do them a 3rd time with the review, just listening and watching, and we're going to document everything, and we're going to review that. So you now know in the next 12 calls, I'm expecting a change of behavior and you to be significantly better. And at the end of the day, if that doesn't happen, this probably isn't going to be the right place for you.
Interesting. Now, how did you stumble upon the approach of audio only, video only, and then
Not done all 3 of them until I have a public speaking coach that I use named Vin Yang out of Australia, one of the top like leadership speakers in the world.
Okay.
And that's his process for becoming a better keynote speaker. Oh. And it is brutal to go through and practice and do what I just said. After this podcast, I will still probably do it because podcasts are different than being on stage.
Sure.
You have to find time for it as well. But like, imagine like you've practiced a 45-minute keynote. Now you just have to watch yourself with it off on audio. And it's probably one of the more painful things I've done in my life, but I've grown the most through it. And I went, well, that's very similar to how I've taken sales, but not that 3-step approach. If it works for keynotes where either $25,000 to $50,000, let's apply it to sales, which sometimes are much more than that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, the first time you did, was there like a major takeaway you took from it? Major thing that you felt you had to work on?
From the public speaking perspective, where I've done that is even as much as I've worked on kind of my tells or how much I move in stage. When you go through that process, there's so much more glaring, the areas that you have to improve. When you do it from a sales perspective, even if you're doing and critiquing yourself, it's the same thing. And you have to do it, the reviews, which I've done this some before, but usually like I will pair with companies where you always have the note takers like Fathom and everything help with this now, but they're still not the same thing as if you have one salesperson on a call. In my mind, you should always have a second salesperson that's listening in, taking notes, because I cannot actually speak and communicate with you in a 2-way conversation and take notes in the way about what's going on, the way as if I'm just a listener. Well, you get a lot of that when you go back through and do this reviews, even just doing it by yourself. So for anybody that's listening, like you can improve, you can get your team to improve by walking them through this process and making them do it. And when I say make them do it, it means compensate them for doing it. Like, hey, if you're trying to improve, have somebody improve and they're like, show me that you've done this 3-step process. And like, it's a micro transaction reward every time you do.
Okay. Now, if you're that CEO and training your sales rep, what do you delegate first? Kind of want them to more ownership, but you don't want to kind of lower the quality of the sales process.
And on the organization you're at, the usually going to do, if we're doing outbound outreach, is I'm going to outsource the qualification to them, because it's going to become very clear when we get on a call, is this an actually potentially good customer? Meaning like they have a problem that we solve, and is that going to be something we do? That's going to be one of the first things. Second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have my sales team cozy up to a customer success team, a customer support team, which hopefully you might have one that's separate. But too often companies are only dealing with things with support and problems when they come up, as opposed to, are people truly getting value out of your service and offering? And so I just say that of an example of like, it's one thing to have like a SaaS product that people are paying for, that might even be happy for. but do you have tools in there like Full Story and other things where you can see, are they actually using it? And if they're not, even though they may be happy, well, you need to, first of all, know that from a product perspective, but your sales team needs to know that because they need to make sure that they're setting expectations up front about what it looks like to get actual dollar figure value out of the end at the other side. I mean, by all means, I've been part of companies where we've been really successful kind of selling fire insurance. You have to have this compliance technology, but then we're going to sell it that way.
Is there? Do you have recommendations for summarization? Their market internal mechanism for gathering that insight from their clients on kind of their happiness?
Yeah, the things you can do right now, just do like literally Google or ChatGPT about like how do I create a customer success like scorecard. And it's going to be different for every. At the end of the day, it's just a green, yellow, red of questions that your team could ask. That's not subjective. It's going to be an obvious. That's either like red. It's highly likely that this one will cancel when it's up for renewal. Yellow or orange, like we're not quite so sure. Green versus they're really happy. And so usually by starting that process saying for our customers specifically and adapting that for us, and you need somewhere between 3 and 10 of tricks that you're going to track. It's going to become very clear about where, if you don't have that information, okay, how to get this information is going to be the first thing.
Sure.
And another way of looking at that is I would say especially smaller companies, if you have a ticketing system, whether it's Zendesk or one of the many off-the-shelf things, I want you to go pull reports on how many tickets are coming from the same people. And what do the tickets look like? Specifically, are there trends in the number of tickets or the timing of tickets and the cancellations? I just say that of too often I find companies in that like kind of 25 to 200 employee range. What happens really good at closing tickets, they are not good at making sure customers solved. I believe the approach, say from a Zendesk perspective, a ticket for a bug into the software product that you're paying for could stay open for 2 years. I don't care about closing that out. I would rather that the support team, when you call in with something, if we're not going to fix that issue, the support team, when you call in with something else, the sales team that reaches out to upsell you, the CEO, if they call you for something, I want them to know that 19 months in that you still have this little annoying bug out there that we're not going to solve for whatever reason, because that's part of the relationship. And we could choose to address it or not, but you're only going to know that if you keep that Zendesk ticket open. And then when you actually do solve it, you should let the person know because really you don't get credit for it. But like instead, what do most people do? They go, this is a bug, we're not going to solve it. This is a feature request, we're not going to solve it. And they just close it out because they're rewarding their support team on how quickly do you close tickets out. Closed tickets doesn't usually, lead to happy customers. Leave them open.
Organizations, let's use the got tickets, you probably survey system, maybe some NPS. How does an organization follow your mentality and measure, I guess, kind of the client's experience, organization?
Surveys are a good story, and I only say that because to me, surveys are the same as, like, let's say, I can always find market data to make it look like a campaign has been successful.
Sure.
And so, at the end of the day, what I really like is contribution at the end of the day, which is a qualitative metric. And so you want to go through and look at your happiest customers, the customers that have churned, and those that are just kind of in the middle of the road. And you want to look for all the things that contributed to that. So let's go back to that example of people are not using your product. Okay, you have a wonderful software product, and you've been using it, and you have customers for 3 years they've been using it, or not been using it, but they've been paying for you, and then they churn out. Well, whose fault is it that they churned out? It does take the team going back through, especially when you're in that like 50 to 200 employee range, and the real money comes from building into your process a once a quarter review that says, let's look especially at the most successful customers and the ones that have churned out. And let's look at each one and identify what contributed. Not to necessarily like fire anybody, but like, did they leave because the product bugs in it or problems? It didn't. Did they leave because sales sold something, president sold something, features that the product doesn't have yet? Maybe on the other hand, marketing actually set a bad expectation up front that sales like actually tried bringing it back into what's realistic terms, and then we can never deliver on this bad expectation for marketing. Well, you want to know that at the end of the day. The same way as, hey, you just closed a new $50,000 customer. And marketing and sales could tap yourself on the back, and what you realize is someone in your support team went to high school with the decision maker.
Yeah.
Well, like in that case, nobody, like the only contribution should be thank you for inviting your high school friend over. And that's what a contribution looks like, especially at small size companies. We care so much about dashboards. And for a true health perspective, it's not a dashboard. Yes, there is a blood pressure and there's a heart rate and there's cholesterol numbers. But at the end of the day, can I walk up 4 flights of stairs and not be winded? Like that's the measure that like you may not get specifically just from a dashboard.
Sure. I like it. Well, let's get into a little bit of the strategy of things. Usually at the weight, makes a little bit of a difference in most things. But what strategy metric do you that leaders should be targeting or know about?
At the end of the day, one of the North Star metrics for me, and I say one of them because I do different than a lot of people, where sometimes they think you have to have only one. But I think the most important nobody has really is the percentage of your revenue growth that's coming from existing customers making referrals for you. And because at the end of the day, so much of the health of your organization and what's going to lead to growth, not just in 2 months, but in 6 months and in 24 months and in 3 and 4 years is going to come from the change of that percentage of your customers that where you have delivered value in such a way, they have no choice but to talk.
Got it. So, out of that, I guess kind of that expansion revenue, what is that kind of leadership quality, maybe something that leaders realize?
It comes into setting the expectations that went up front, both just from a branding perspective, but every interaction that people have. And it's not just the pure value that your company has left them with. It's with how people felt at the end of the day as well. It's when they had a problem, did they feel like they had to really fight for it or not? So like, I'll give this example. I have Starlink at our mountain property. And so for whatever reason, the modem and the router, nothing turns. So I pop online and I talk to Grok, and it's like, oh, we're sorry for that problem. We'll send you a new dish and everything. But I also bought a new extension cord, for it, and I also had to have a $50 adapter that went onto it. And right away, Grok said, I can't do that. Let me give you a person. And their response was, hey, that was part of you getting set up initially with us. Our system failed. You'll have 3 separate shipments. We want to make sure you're up and running. All 3 of them will come. You have 3 different confirmation things. I'm going to leave the ticket open. You should get all of those within the next few days. If I don't hear from you that you've received them all and it's up and running, I'll call you in, I remember it was, 6 or 7 days. That both, like, not are they sending me what I want, but from a feeling perspective, what I got was you actually care, as opposed to how we normally feel about like an internet provider. You care that I'm up and running again, and you're not going to make me chase you to make sure that, if I need anything else. And I was like, that's a great experience.
Yeah. Now, aside from the systems part of that, how does a leader and cultivate that culture out of their team?
It's make sure that your customers realize, at the end of the day, not your customers, but your company realizes I have hired to do a job, which means specific tasks. But at the end of the day, it's not those tasks that I care about. It's not the role I have you in. I've hired you to reach business outcomes because this is a goal I want for the company. And your job, whether it's customer support in the case I gave for Starlink, or it's a salesperson, or it's a support person, or the person delivering the service, or the software engineer, I've hired you and I'm paying you and I'm giving you benefits because I want a business outcome from you. And that business outcome is tied to serving our customers. And so that should mean that anybody in the company should be able to go to anybody else and say, what are the outcomes we want from the company? How does your role, what outcomes do we want from your role that's going to help the company get to that, which is ultimately making the customer successful? And from a leadership perspective, I'm almost guarantee, your listeners, if you start just pick 5 people in your company, and especially those that are not closest to you, and you ask them, what business outcomes do we want from you? What will come out of the person's mouth are job tasks, not, oh, you want happy customers that in my case of Starlink, that are back up to not thinking about whether their internet is working as quickly as possible. That's ultimately, I don't want internet. I want to think about the fact that I have internet. And so that's one of the things that every answer for their involved. And if they can't, then that means what role have you not done as a leader? Have you not explained the business outcomes you're trying to reach for the whole company this year? And translated then how that specific role ties to outcomes that will drive to there. That's how that support discussion, the support tickets, you leave it open or closed. everybody should be able to answer your philosophy for that.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. That whole making sure that it's more than the metric of closing a ticket. That you're really trying to make sure that you've got that stickiness with the client, so that you're in a better position for that referral.
Absolutely. I think it not only builds trust with the customers, it builds trust because it says, look, as the business owner or as your manager or as the boss, the overall boss, I don't have this all figured out. I'm telling you, look, we're doing support tickets, we're doing these things. Here's what I think we should happen. But at the end of the day, here's the outcomes I want. And I want to make sure our customers feel like we have served them and given them value. So if you have ideas for something you've been told to do that you think is contradictory to that, I'm open to hearing that as well. So it's building trust with your team so they realize where we're trying to go. And there are sometimes like you have to unbalance the whole system, which may mean close out a whole bunch of tickets. In the case of Zendesk tickets. Other cases, we leave them open. But you're expressing that to the team. And when your team feels supported and they feel like you trust them to make these decisions, they're going to start doing the same thing for your customers.
Got it. So if an organization, if he's got kind of a weak referral growth in his organization, where do you look? Is he looking at sales, service, leadership, that experience thing you're talking about?
It does depend on the organization. And so I do find it usually there's usually one of three places. It's either in sales is selling expectations that your company knows they can't meet. And so that's usually pretty easy to identify. You're going to see a much lower than you otherwise would. Another place could be actually on the onboard customers, especially for those of us on the B2B side. So much happens not in the initial closing, but it's in that initial feeling of buyer's remorse and getting a customer up to speed so that they're starting to feel initial value. But then the third place, and this is where some of the like you've done the other two really well, and you can look at those and go, those are great. You don't come back and customer basically that this is a great experience or this is working effortlessly as well. Like there's nothing wrong with it. Like I have real systems that run on my site behind the speed, just that keep my servers up and running, do all the balancing, and they make things load really fast. And once a month, get an email that says, here's how many visits you were, and here's what, and here's here's your uptime. We asked your things are because of that. So we saved the 5,000 people that came to this article. We saved X number of hours of load time for them trying to read your article. Wow. Like it just worked. I didn't think about it, but you're softly reminding me in a positive way. Oh, wow. I'm glad I'm paying you money every month.
Yeah. Then you feel that symbiotic relationship, sync with each other. And it's just, there's a problem, show up. But when there's not a problem, reminding them that there's not a problem.
Right. And it does depend on what your business offering is. I mean, on the other side too, sometimes, retainer things or there are places where you're a customer to keep paying you and they're happy for you to for you to be there behind the scenes. It's helpful to come back to them and we are here for when these things come up. You're already paying us for that. Like not in the B2B world, but it's like a membership to a franchise chiropractor clinic across the nation. Well, they do any of this, the best of anything on the B2B or B2C side is like, if I think I renew on like the 25th of the month, if it's in about 10 days and I have not been once, I get a nice text message that does not say you haven't come in. I get a text message that says, hey, like we're here for you, like there's no wait time, we got you, or whenever you want. And doesn't bring name for me not coming. Their wording is even wonderful on the app where it's like you've got 3 of 4 visits left before the 25th when it rolls over. And it's just reminding me, because they know too, I'm sure people that have to go to other places don't use the service and eventually they just cancel. Instead, I get that little reminder. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a little tight right now from the gym. Start tomorrow after I leave the gym. And so they're reminding me to use the thing that I'm already paying for, that I'm always happy when I leave for. Well, you can do the same thing from your software side or your design shop or whatever that is.
Now, you mentioned specifically the onboarding process. Are there tips or secrets or things that you recommend organizations do as they're onboarding for whatever their service or solution is?
Yes, there are. Two. So one is re-ask what the person's primary motivation is. What goals are they wanting to get in the next X amount of time, 3 months or 6 months? Because it's very different. Either because something has changed, so do not assume what's in the sales CRM is actually accurate, Or they may have seen something else in your experience, or you walking through the training that says, oh, I bought for reasons A and B, but because now you've shown me the value of C, I think that's actually going to be a big driver for me. So you want to ask them again that at the end of kind of the onboarding process and make note of it and follow back that. And the second thing is you want to take note of the personal things with the customers that are actually using your product and service. And I say that as might be decision makers. If they mention that they've got a daughter in softball, or they've got a son that's doing something, we can bring it up in conversations and ask how things are going. I mean, we especially post COVID, like we've always made this of our emotions that are back it up from a logic perspective. So like you want to make sure that same kind of thing is happening through the onboarding process. And so usually, somebody's let their guard down a little more, so they're going to be open to kind of sharing some of those things that's important to them. Or, hey, summer, we take off, part of July on this vacation, or my son does. Make a note of that so that you can ask about that, and also maybe not push them if, like they mentioned, they're always on holiday for a certain time.
Now, where do you? Obviously, you're big into CRMs and so forth. How does the typical organization manage that process? How do they think about what to ask, or think about what to do, or track it? All of those kinds of things.
Yeah, great question. So I'm on CRMs, and so they should be tracked in the CRM that the whole team uses. The tips for people that are listening that are not necessarily the owner. So owners, the companies, close your ears because you don't want to hear this. But if you're a salesperson, if you're a customer success person, I'm a firm believer that you should have a personal CRM. And I say that a personal CRM is different than HubSpot or Salesforce or SureSend or anything. There's only a couple of them. There's one now called Mesh, and there's one called Dex. It's like getdex.com. There's no such thing as a pipe drive of a pipeline in there. There's not a deal to be closed. And you're going to have another job after this job, and your personal contacts, your friends at church and at synagogue and temple and whatnot, like you have contacts in your life that you would like to be able to help in different ways. And so that's where you should capture those things. It'll pull in iMessages and everything. I'll take notes both in my work CRM because I want other members of my team to take note of those things. And then I will capture things like that in my personal CRM as well. I happen to use Dex. But that allows me to capture those things in different ways. Some companies, I have a work phone. In some cases, I use a personal phone. But it's not rare nowadays to be friends on Facebook or Instagram with a client. And so it's like it pulls in like little messages from Facebook Messenger. And when that happens, I need to know and capture that in the system.
Gotcha. So that's almost a the sales rep is there to sell and close company mission and stuff, but the salesperson's value is always going to be their they know the relationships they have, those kinds of things. So you're advocating for both of those, that hey, be a good salesperson, but also maintain your connections.
Yeah, maintain your connections. And I will say what will make you the salesperson. The one of the reasons I'm really good at being a salesperson when I'm in that role is, as I mentioned, I have no problem telling a potential buyer there's a better solution for us, or the solution you're looking for is not us for these reasons, and I don't know if there's something out there for it, but I can tell you will be unhappy if you pay a check to us. Well, if I tell you now, that builds such trust between us. When I call you back in 3 years and I'm at a different company and I say, hey, I have a product and I think this meets your needs, you will take my call. And you will also, it's not rare at all to have a salesperson tell that to somebody, and that person will actually refer clients then back to that current company. Well, that's where the personal CRM comes in over time. You become a better salesperson over time as you maintain these personal relationships where I'm always here to serve you, whether or not it's with the company that I'm at specifically at this moment.
Gotcha. Okay, that sounds incredible. Well, Kurt, we're coming close to the end of our, and I kind of wanted to treat our time today like every document, kind of talk through a whole bunch of stuff, a bunch of topics, and in my world in technology, we say it's only scalable when it doesn't depend on one fragile, critical system or point of failure. One big for the leaders who are listening to this call and kind of wanting to build teams that can grow without ever through them.
Yeah, great question for kind of wrap. We only kind of like with leadership. For me, I think too many people shy away from leadership because they think it's slower. It's not. It's the only way to actually get around the place where that one leader, whether it's the CEO or the president, where they're the bottleneck. You have to get the entire organization set up. Do they feel like they're serving the customer? They realize that your job is not there to rescue them. Your job is to help serve them reach the business outcomes, which means that we're all on board with like trying to build the next person to make a decision that I not have to be part of. And so that may mean coaching, that may mean other things. And so the only way to get out of a command and control structure where the CEO or the president, the owner ends up being the bottleneck is to actually serve the next person in line so that they don't need you in the second or third or the fifth time that the same problem comes up.
For the people, for my audience that's listening into this, can you explain more about servant leadership? You know, what that means to you, how you, I guess, how to bring that to bear in your...
Yeah, for me, there's only two types of leadership. There's an authoritative leader, and you could be a really nice person, but at the end of the day, you know, you're the nice micromanager in a way. Decisions run through telling people exactly what to do in a specific way, because you're hiring people to do specific tasks. The servant leader, to me, takes an entirely different approach, and it's that concept of I'm hiring you for a business outcome. I may be hiring you into customer support or customer success if we're talking about that onboarding role, but that's a role that I have. It's a business outcome, at which point then my job, the moment that I've hired you, no matter what role in the company is, I'm acknowledging I've hired you to reach a business outcome with tasks that I don't want to do, at which point that may mean that I then need to take the approach that doesn't just tell you to do those tasks differently or better. It means that I need to be taking the role of serving you to do those, to reach the outcomes that I want. That might mean getting you outside training. That might mean, as I gave the example before, of pulling up next to you and doing this shoulder to shoulder with you where you can see how I'm doing it my way, and then I'm coaching you to do it differently. But the whole point is I'm serving you to reach the business outcomes that I want.
Gotcha. Makes sense. What else? So we talked a little bit about kind of your theme today, but there's a lot about you got your big message, but what prescriptions can I roll out to our audience coming from you in regards to this?
I think for me, so much of it just does come down to that, whether it's referrals or happy customers, it all comes down to for me, it's the concept of serving. It's that like you come to my company and you buy our service, you buy our product. Like you're still one outcome out of it. And so at the end of the day, it's my job, both for how I treat my employees as well as, how you come to our company is serve you. And so too many people, I feel like they may actually have that approach when you talk to them, that they are as a person. But when you look at to your point about systems and standard operating procedures, when you look what's actually in place from a systems perspective, they're actually much more task oriented and about just getting money at the end of the day. Now they're nice people, but at the end of the day, it's still they're not taking that approach of serving. I'm firmly of a belief that look, the reason I've made so much personal money, but I've made companies so much money, is because we create a huge bit of value and we make sure that you're aware of it in a nice way. And I just say that of like we've all had people involved where it's like they've done things, but we feel a little bit of shame behind it too. and so, like, you have to make sure you don't trigger that. But at the end of the day, like, if I'm serving you, if I'm taking things off your plate, like, you're going to be more than happy to pay me money for that. Because, like, at the end of the day, it's like, this isn't just, we're not doing things, especially on the B side, just to feel good. We're doing things to create value at the end of the day. And so, if your business is growing because of you working with us, you're going to be more than happy to pay us money. And so, like, and to refer us to people as well. And so at the end of the day, it all comes down to serving, but it's getting everybody to think about that. And serving isn't just even that short-term thing. It's like your best employees, your worst employees, they will have things outside of work that come up that will impact them. Your employees will have things that come up that if you're on the command and control side, and even though you may be nice much of the time, if you're very outcome focused for just do exactly this on this time frame, what does that employee feel like when elder care gets thrust into their life, or they have a special needs kid, or their spouse comes down with cancer? You may be very unproductive for 3 weeks or 3 months, but if you create an environment where they know that they can come to you and tell you that, hey, look, this is going on right now, you may still keep one of your best employees over a 6-month and 12-month period. They just may add very little value for 30 days or 60 days. But you want to have an environment where they, one, feel transparent enough to tell you about those things going on, but also like that they know that you're there for them when that goes on. That goes back to serving them, because without them, your customers aren't going to get served.
Sure. Take care of your people so they don't feel like they'll be there for you because you're there for them.
Yeah, but that's so many of us say that, and our vision statements and culture statements say that, but that's not what happens behind the scenes. And even if it is something that happens, even if that is who you are as the owner of a 100-person company, your employees have worked for companies that had all those right words on the website, and that's not who they actually were. So you have to bring up continually, like the examples where you failed to be the person or the company that you wanted to be. Share that. So like as part of, hey, we're trying to get better, or here's why you did this right for somebody. Because like some cases we're having to overcome from the PTSD of other bosses. In cases, maybe the crappy boss was me before I changed.
I get that. I'm a big fan. I read a few books here and there, and I was reading, Multipliers, and I was so excited to read it and hear how good of a boss I was until I read all the diminishers sounded awfully familiar to me as well.
Yeah, the hardest thing that I find, but the most valuable for my company is like people that do any research. Like, hey, on my web, you want to know more about servant leadership? I've got like 15,000 words on like the business case of servant leadership. Like, if CPA wrote it in there.
Okay.
But it's like one of those meaningful things for that is like, I want the conflict out of my team. I'd rather, if you disagree with something, I'd rather you bring it up now, both so there's not animosity, but I would rather you bring up something so that we could perhaps come to, is this a better path or not now, versus like being forced into it two years later with the decision. Well, that requires healthy conflict.
Sure.
Well, we never would get that right 100% of the time. And happen, you need to bring those situations up to the whole team. Here's where I failed on the healthy conflict side, and you share with the whole team, because that's the only way people actually start to realize that like this company is actually different. Or, hey, we were going to make this decision. I say we were going to make this decision. Amanda came to me with a different idea. We talked through it. I didn't think it was right. It took a couple of weeks. We looked at it. We did make a different decision, and then we closed a $100,000 deal for it. Then that's even the case. I was the roadblock and superhero of the story. Somebody else is going to come to you then when you share that story and that case of healthy conflict. They're going to come to be like, hey, I have an idea about how we can save some money, or I have an idea about how we can make some more money. But you have to tell the things that you would normally just bury under the rug.
Got it. Excellent. Well, how can reach out to you and get if they have any questions or want to have a conversation about leadership with you?
Yeah, my personal website at Kurt Uhlir, UHLIR.com, the best place.
Okay.
If you want to know a little more, like anything in writing, there'll be stuff there. Or if you just want to see me with a skid steer, an emotional skid steer, helping me control things, see me carving out hiking trails with my 9-year-olds.
Okay, nice. I like it. Then myself, I'll make sure the links and enclose in the show notes as well. But reach me, email, thedoctor@fullgroup.net, all spelled out, or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Make sure you mention that you heard me through the podcast, because I get a lot of invites and don't always accept every one of them there. But brings us to the end of our doctor's appointment today, and I think the diagnosis is pretty clear that if everything in your organization kind of has to you kind of don't have a growth system. It's probably more like road construction on those kind of traffic jam with the title, if you will. And then I think Kurt also reminded us that leadership. It's not about being soft. It's about building teams, kind of establishing clear ownership, experiences, or a company that can scale without the CEO. So I think that's a lesson, we can all believe in. But anyways, if today's conversation helped made you critically think about your own style or what you're doing, please subscribe to the Talk to the Doc podcast. Don't hold it hostage. Share it with a friend, another leader, and the kind of organization that people trust enough to follow. I'm your host, Steve the Dr. Meek, and the doctor is out. See you next time. Thanks to Kurt.
Thank you.